Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. So today we're continuing our deep dive into the DK Publishing Solo Star Wars Story Official Guide. Thank you again DK for sending me a copy. It's been awesome to go through. This is sort of the newer style one. It's a lot more graphically presented, a lot bolder in its, color pops and call outs and that sort of thing. Not your traditional DK publishing guide to these things. Still, it's good to have the style mixed up for sure. And this time around, we're talking about the Place Your Bets section of the book, not in its entirety because there is a wealth of information, and it turns out that the final chapter of this thing is a little bit slight by comparison to the other 5, so we're going to push some stuff forward a bit. But today we're talking about Dryden Vos's yacht, The First Light, and the stuff that happens in and around it, which, as it turns out, connects to a lot of different parts of the Star Wars universe. And I mean that from both the literal standpoint and also the meta standpoint in terms of other media properties. So let's first start out by talking about Crimson Dawn itself, which gets a little more background information as part of the conversation about the First Light and Dryden Vos and his activities and whatnot. So it is an emerging criminal organization, that's how it's described, but certainly a very up-and-coming one, and one that apparently is attracting a lot of attention and needs to be spied on, basically. So one of the spreads in this part of the book includes a list of partygoers, and one of them is a spy from something called the Rang clan, R-A-N-G clan, and apparently her presence there as a spy is at least somewhat suspicious to somebody within the Dryden Vos organization, within the Crimson Dawn element that's on the First Light. So they're kind of aware, and it's, not yet clear how they're going to deal with her just yet, but, that adds for some palace intrigue to be sure. And I forgot to mention from yesterday's podcast that as far as the Cloud Riders go, the group controlled by Enfys Nest, there's supposed to be very little predictability about what the Cloud Riders are targeting in their attacks, but if you do a careful analysis, at least according to the guide, you find that there is a significant hostility toward the operations of Crimson Dawn. So Crimson Dawn doesn't just have other criminal organizations per se, they also have pirate gangs attacking them and, pirate gangs that have different ulterior motives too. Now, when I talk about the connections to other parts of the Star Wars galaxy, well, let's start with, let's say, Rogue One, for example. So if you'll recall, after Dryden Vos is having his meeting with the regional governor and he actually kills the guy, he's got a pair of Kyuzo blades, and I'll deal with those in a minute, but he puts them on a tray, and the tray is being held by a very odd-looking character that doesn't have the top of her head. This is one of the Decraniated, and the Decraniated were first introduced in Rogue One. They are the product of an experiment by the nefarious Dr. Cornelius Evazan, as in, I have the death sentence on 12 systems, Evazan. So apparently Dryden Vos has at least one of the Decraniated in his employ. As for those Kyuzo blades, well, Kyuzo as a species, we've seen them on a couple of different occasions, or almost seen them, as it were. Probably the one you might be most familiar with if you are a fan of the expanded, not the expanded universe, aka Legends, but really just, the Clone Wars, and also the new novels, particularly Aftermath. Embo, who is a bounty hunter, appeared in both of those. And the one that you might be familiar with but are not familiar with exactly would be Constable Zuvio, who was famously made into an action figure for The Force Awakens and then was in a blink and you'll miss it moment. Or was that Sarko Plank? One of the two. Anyway, Zuvio ended up showing up in one of the stories in Tales from a Galaxy Far, Far Away, Aliens Volume 1 by Landry Q. Walker that was released as part of the Journey to The Force Awakens stuff. And there's another bit of a Clone Wars connection in Dryden Vos's ship as well, because apparently one of the guests on that ship at the time that we see the partygoers in Solo: A Star Wars Story includes the current Count of Sereno, Serreno, and that planet would be the planet where Count Dooku came from. He was the Count of Sereno previously, and so now we have a new Count of Sereno being feted at at Dryden Vos's ship. There's also a nod to both the comics and to Star Wars Rebels with a reference to one of the artifacts in Dryden Vos's study. So there's a lot of different stuff in there and lots of Easter eggs that have actually been detailed on a Star Wars show video. But in Solo: A Star Wars Story's official guide, one of the things they flag is a Noghri, Noghri, piece of headgear, and the Noghri have been seen in two prominent places, one of them being the Cassian and K2SO one-shot comic book that came out after Rogue One, but probably more famously that would be the species of the assassin Rook, and he would be Thrawn's assassin who showed up and was voiced by Warwick Davis in the Star Wars Rebels TV series. I'm sorry, did I say headpiece, headgear? It's a carver set. It's ridiculous. It's a carving set of some kind. And there's also a giant masthead of someone named Zim the Despot, and this would be now the second mention of Zim the Despot in 5 or 6 months, because he was referenced in the Last Jedi Incredible Cross-Sections book as well, and that is a pull from Star Wars Legends from way back. So Jason Fry did that in the Last Jedi Cross-Sections book, and now Pablo Hidalgo has followed suit by putting a Zim the Despot reference in Solo: A Star Wars Story as well. And if you're wondering what masthead I'm talking about, it's that giant crystal skull thing. Oh, and speaking of crystal skulls, there is an Indiana Jones Easter egg in here as well. So if you remember when Beckett and Han and Chewie had to check in their weapons before they could go on to the First Light, before they could go up to talk to Dryden Vos, there's a guy that's operating the gun check. His name is Tot Ra, T-O-H-T-R-A, and yes, that would be Tot, the toady for the Nazis in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, as it's now known, and of course Ra being the Staff of Ra, and the headpiece to the Staff of Ra was the thing that was burned into Tot's hand, so neat little Indiana Jones Easter egg thrown in there as well. And we're going to stop there, and we're going to pick up tomorrow with The Lodge. That's the place in Fort Ipso where we find Lando and L337, and even a reference to Return of the Jedi, sort of, it seems, maybe. But for now, you know, that's where we're going to stop. Over on the audio version of the podcast, I'll do one more thing, and that's Last Jedi Trivia. But for now, for this video, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.